Officers approach cautiously, weapons drawn. After a 16-hour manhunt that had an entire community on lockdown, the suspect has finally surrendered. The woman being placed in handcuffs is 30-year-old Mia Bailey. Just hours earlier, she had broken into her parents' home in Washington City, Utah, and brutally murdered them both. She shot her mother Gail 4 times and her father Joseph twice in the head. She then fired multiple rounds through a locked bedroom door, trying to kill her brother Dustin and his wife as they hid inside, calling 911. The attack was methodical, premeditated, and according to prosecutors, very chilling. But what makes this arrest footage particularly disturbing is what comes next. In the interrogation room, when detectives ask Mia why she killed her parents, her answer is cold and simple. She hated them. When asked if she has any remorse, she says no. When asked if she would do it again, she says yes. The officers who conducted that interview would later describe her as eerily calm, completely detached from the gravity of what she had just done. There were no tears, no visible emotion, no indication that she had just ended the lives of the 2 people who had raised her and fought for her for 30 years. But this case is far more complex than a simple story of evil. It's a story about severe mental illness, a fractured family system, desperate attempts to get help that fell through the cracks, and the question that haunts everyone involved. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Less than a month after her arrest, Mia Bailey stands before a judge for her initial appearance. The charges being read against her are staggering.
Count 1, aggravated murder, domestic violence, a first-degree felony, punishable by up to 25 years to life or life in prison without parole. Count 2, aggravated murder, domestic violence, a first-degree felony, punishable by up to 25 years to life or life in prison without the possibility of parole.
The crime scene was a suburban home in Washington City, a quiet community just outside St. George in southern Utah. Joseph Bailey was 70 years old, a retired maritime engineer who had spent decades working on tugboats, doing physically demanding and often dangerous work to provide stability for his family. Gail Bailey was 69, a homemaker and fierce advocate for her children, particularly when it came to mental health issues. For years, she had navigated schools, doctors, and systems that resisted accommodation, fighting for resources and understanding for her daughter's complex psychiatric needs. On that June evening, their lives ended in violence. Mia Bailey, who had legally changed her name and gender from Colin Troy Bailey in 2023, arrived at the family home. She broke in through the door. What happened next was methodical and devastating. She shot her mother Gail 4 times. She shot her father Joseph twice in the head. The killings were execution style, cold, and deliberate. Dustin Bailey, Mia's brother, was in the home with his wife. When he heard the gunshots, he knew immediately what was happening. He and his wife barricaded themselves in a bedroom and called 911. Through the locked door, they heard more shots. Mia fired multiple rounds at the door, attempting to shoot them. The bullets pierced through the wood, but miraculously, neither Dustin nor his wife were hit. As police sirens began to wail in the distance, Mia fled the scene in a yellow 2014 Kia Soul. The manhunt began immediately. Washington City Police and the Washington County Sheriff's Office launched a massive search. SWAT teams were deployed throughout the area. The community was placed on alert, with residents advised to shelter in place as armed officers searched for the suspect. For 16 hours, Mia Bailey was on the run, and the entire community held its breath. The next day, June 19, 2024, she surrendered peacefully. Body camera footage from her arrest would later reveal a woman who seemed detached, almost calm. The coldness of her statements, the complete lack of emotion, sent shockwaves through the investigators who interviewed her. But to understand how a daughter could murder her own parents, you have to go back further. You have to understand who Mia Bailey was before that night, and the years of struggle that preceded the violence. Mia Bailey had a documented history of severe mental illness. She had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, psychosis, ADHD, OCD, anxiety, and possibly bipolar disorder. She also had autism, which compounded the complexity of her psychiatric conditions. Her family had spent years trying to help her navigate these challenges. Gail, her mother, had been particularly devoted to advocating for her, attending IEP meetings, researching treatments, and fighting systems that wanted to write Mia off as too difficult or too complicated. Gail's dedication to Mia was extraordinary. She spent countless hours on the phone with doctors, therapists, and school administrators. She researched every treatment option, every medication, every therapy that might help her daughter. She never gave up, even when Mia's condition seemed to be worsening, even when Mia became increasingly estranged from the family. But despite Gail's best efforts, Mia's condition continued to deteriorate. She became estranged from much of the family. Her behavior grew increasingly unstable. The combination of her multiple psychiatric diagnoses created what her defense attorney would later describe as a perfect storm of mental illness. And then, in the days leading up to the murders, something happened that would later become one of the most haunting details of the case. Mia voluntarily checked herself into a state-run mental health facility. She was experiencing significant psychiatric symptoms. She knew something was wrong. She was asking for help. She was held for observation and treatment, but after just 10 days, she was released. The facility determined she was stable enough to leave. 10 days later, her parents were dead.
One of the most painful truths is that Mia did try to get help. In the days before the murders, Mia voluntarily checked herself into a state-run mental health facility. She was experiencing significant psychiatric symptoms. She knew something was wrong. She sought care, and she was released after only 3 days. At the time of her release, she was still experiencing serious symptoms. She was not stable, she was not safe, and she was not adequately supported. We believe, and we say this with care and seriousness, that she should not have been discharged so quickly. That decision was another failure in a long chain of failures that left everybody vulnerable.
This detail would become central to the family's grief and their later advocacy. Mia had reached out. She had tried to get help. The system had evaluated her and deemed her safe to release. And then the worst happened. The question that would haunt everyone involved was whether adequate care during that hospitalization could have prevented the tragedy. Was 10 days enough? Were the right assessments made? Did anyone recognize the severity of her condition? These questions would never have satisfactory answers, but they would drive the Bailey family's commitment to advocating for mental health system reform. At the crime scene, investigators found ballistics evidence that matched Mia's firearm. Dustin Bailey provided witness statements describing what he had heard and experienced. And Mia herself had confessed during her interrogation, showing no remorse and expressing hatred for her family. The evidence was overwhelming. There was no question about who had committed the murders. In August 2024, Mia underwent a competency evaluation to determine if she was fit to stand trial. Despite her severe mental health issues, the evaluation found that she was competent. She understood the charges against her. She could participate in her own defense. She could communicate with her attorney. The case would move forward. The charges were staggering. 2 counts of first-degree aggravated murder, 1 count of attempted aggravated murder, aggravated burglary, and 7 counts of felony discharge of a firearm. All charges included domestic violence enhancements. The murders were classified as aggravated because of the premeditation, the family targeting, and the multiple victims. Under Utah law, aggravated murder carries the possibility of life without parole or even the death penalty.
Count 1, aggravated murder, domestic violence, a first-degree felony, punishable by up to 25 years to life or life in prison without parole. Count 2, aggravated murder, domestic violence, a first-degree felony, punishable by up to 25 years to life or life in prison without the possibility of parole. Count 3, attempted aggravated murder, domestic violence, a first-degree felony. Count 4, aggravated burglary, domestic violence, a first-degree felony. Count 5, felony discharge of a firearm, domestic violence, a first-degree felony. Count 6, felony discharge of a firearm, domestic violence, a first-degree felony. Count 7, felony discharge of a firearm, domestic violence, first-degree felony. Count 8, felony discharge of a firearm, domestic violence, a first-degree felony. Count 9, felony discharge of a firearm, domestic violence, first-degree felony. Count 10, felony discharge of a firearm, domestic violence, first-degree felony. And count 11, felony discharge of a firearm, domestic violence, a third-degree felony. You have the right to remain silent.
The litany of charges went on and on. Each count represented a different aspect of the violence that had occurred that night. Each count carried the potential for years, even decades in prison.
You have the right to remain silent. You are currently being held without bail. You also have the right to have an attorney represent you. If you cannot afford an attorney, I will appoint an attorney at no charge to yourself.
When asked if she needed a court-appointed attorney, Mia responded that she did. She had no money to hire her own defense.
Are you requesting a court-appointed attorney?
Yes, I'm requesting a court attorney.
Thank you. Do you currently have any money in a checking or savings account?
Not enough to cover a lawyer.
When asked about her assets, Mia mentioned jewelry, her car, a MacBook Air, some high-end silverware, and dishes and computer electronics. But none of it was enough to afford private legal representation.
What assets do you have?
I have jewelry, I have my car. So that's a little bit complicated. I have an Apple MacBook Air, the higher end one. I have silverware dishes, like some high-end ones. I have high-end computer electronics that were probably about a couple thousand, or at least 1,000.
For nearly a year, the case crawled through the legal system. Mia remained in custody at Washington County Jail, held without bail. Her attorney, Ryan Stout, was appointed to represent her. The family waited, the community waited, and then, exactly 1 year after her arrest, on June 19, 2025, Mia Bailey appeared in court for her arraignment. She pleaded not guilty, but something had changed in Mia during that year in custody. While incarcerated, she had converted to Islam. This religious conversion would later play a significant role in her statements to the court. She began to reflect on what she had done. The cold detachment she had shown during her interrogation began to crack. Remorse started to seep in. She began to read the Quran, to pray, to seek some kind of spiritual understanding of her actions and their consequences. Then, in November 2025, during what was supposed to be a routine status hearing, Mia Bailey shocked the courtroom by changing her plea. She pleaded guilty and mentally ill to 2 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of aggravated assault. It was a plea deal. In exchange for her guilty plea, the other charges, the burglary and the multiple firearm discharge counts, would be dropped. And crucially, the Washington County Attorney's Office would not seek the death penalty. The guilty and mentally ill designation was significant. Under Utah Code Section 7716A101, it acknowledged that Mia had severe mental health issues at the time of the crime, but it did not excuse her actions. She would be held accountable. She would go to prison, but she would also receive mental health treatment while incarcerated. It was a recognition that both things could be true at once. She was responsible for her actions, and she was severely mentally ill. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for December 19, 2025. It would be one of the most emotionally charged court proceedings the community had seen in years. As the date approached, Mia requested to skip the in-person hearing, citing fears of a mental breakdown. She was afraid that seeing her family in person, hearing their statements, and facing the full weight of what she had done would cause her to completely fall apart. Judge Keith Barnes denied the request. She would appear, but she would do so via video link from the jail. She did not have to be physically present in the courtroom, but she would have to face the consequences of her actions. On December 19, 2025, the sentencing hearing began. The proceeding lasted about 1 hour. The courtroom was packed with family members, media, and members of the community who had followed the case closely. On the screen, Mia Bailey sat quietly in her jail uniform, her face partially obscured. She was visibly shaking. Throughout the hearing, she remained silent, occasionally sniffing and glancing sadly at her family members who were present. She never spoke a word. The victim impact statements began. One by one, Mia's brothers stepped forward to speak about their parents, about the loss, about the impossibility of justice in a case like this. Corey Bailey spoke first.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Your Honor. I apologize. I'm kind of still underprepared for things.
His voice was steady but heavy with grief. He spoke about the impossibility of finding justice when the loss is so profound.
I come up here still conflicted about all of this, just thinking a lot for the past few days what it means to have justice served. As you may have well read in my letter, I don't feel like there can be any true justice in something like this.
Corey's statement captured the heartbreak of the situation. This wasn't just about punishing a criminal. This was about a family torn apart, a family that had lost both their parents and, in many ways, their sister.
It is unfair all around that my family has been broken by this in many ways. We've lost our parents, and we've lost a sibling in many ways as well. So either way, no matter what, we are losing as a family on this sentence.
Corey spoke about the reality they were facing as a family. No sentence, no matter how severe or lenient, would bring their parents back. No outcome would restore what had been lost. They were grieving not just for Joseph and Gail, but also for the sister they had known, the person Mia had been before mental illness had taken over her life.
For me and my family, the truest sense of justice we can come up with is making sure that we are safe now and in the future. And then also making sure that Mia is taken care of in the state hands as well for the foreseeable future, and that it stays that way.
He talked about the fear that remained, the concern that if Mia were ever released without adequate support and treatment, she could pose a danger again.
Seeing what happens to people who are kicked out of the system and live on the streets, ostracized by society, and it is not easy. And knowing that being in jail is not easy either. Neither one of those things are a good outlook for my sibling. Him being out is not a good outlook for my family, and our beliefs is that we would still possibly be under threat in the future. So we would like to recognize that, it is unfair all around for all of us.
Then Dustin Bailey took the stand. He had been in the house that night. He had heard the gunshots. He had hidden in a bedroom while his sister tried to kill him. His statement was longer, more detailed, and more direct.
Your Honor, we sit before this court as the children, grandchildren, sister, brother, mother, extended family, and friends. The majority of the remaining family that hasn't spoken today of Joseph Blue Bailey and Gail Bailey, two real people whose lives were defined not by how they died, but how they lived. We also stand here as a family to Mia. That dual reality is not something we choose, but is something that we must carry honestly.
Dustin's statement was powerful in its clarity. He was there not just to speak for the victims, but also to acknowledge the complicated reality that Mia was still their family member, still someone they had once loved and cared for. Dustin spoke about his father, Joseph, the maritime engineer who had spent months at a time away from home, doing dangerous work to provide for his family.
Our father, Joseph Blue Bailey, spent most of his working life as a maritime engineer on tugboats. He was gone for months at a time, doing physically demanding and often dangerous work so his family would be stable and secure. He believed in responsibility, not excuses. If something broke, he fixed it. He showed his values through consistency rather than words, by working hard, providing for his family, and being present in the ways he knew how to be.
Joseph Bailey was not a man of many words, but he was a man of action. He worked long hours on tugboats, navigating dangerous waters, maintaining heavy machinery, doing whatever it took to ensure his family had what they needed. He was steady, reliable, and committed. He spoke about his mother, Gail, the advocate who had fought tirelessly for Mia's care.
Our mother, Gail, was a homemaker, but advocacy was her life's work. She spent years navigating schools, doctors, and systems that resisted accommodation, particularly when it came to mental illness. She did that work without a title, without pay, and without recognition. When Mia struggled, Gail's response was not frustration or withdrawal, it was persistence. She meant it, even when it had exhausted her, even when it cost her peace, and even when it delayed the life she and our father had worked decades to earn.
Gail had sacrificed so much for Mia. She had delayed her own retirement, her own dreams, her own peace, to ensure that Mia received the care and support she needed. And in the end, the person she had fought so hard to protect had taken her life. Dustin described what they had lost, not abstract concepts, but real, tangible moments.
What we miss is not abstract. We miss sitting on the porch with them at the end of the day when we were visiting. We miss phone calls that didn't have an agenda, just checking in. We miss our mom's pies that won contests and anchored our holidays, something familiar, expected, and uniquely hers. We miss our dad's steady presence, doing small repairs, keeping things moving, and grounding the room without needing to be the center of it. The grandchildren miss grandparents who showed up, who babysat, ferried to them sports and activities, spoiled them, and made them feel safe. These ordinary moments are gone forever.
These were the losses that statistics could never capture. The phone calls, the pies, the small repairs, the babysitting, the feeling of safety that grandparents provide. All of it was gone, erased in a single night of violence.
If Bill and Gail were here today, they would not ask for the harshest sentence simply because it exists. And they would ask for treatment, structure, safety, acknowledgement of severe mental illness, and yes, consequences, but not retribution. They believed accountability mattered. They did not believe in destroying people to satisfy anger.
Then Dustin turned to address Mia directly.
Mia, we do need to speak to you directly and plainly. What you did ended the lives of our parents, our family, and that truth does not soften with time, explanation, or context. Two people are gone forever because of your actions, and accountability is required. It must be serious, and it must reflect the harm that was done.
But even as he demanded accountability, Dustin acknowledged the reality of Mia's mental illness.
At the same time, we refuse to pretend you arrived at that moment with a healthy mind, full capacity, or adequate support. You did not. You arrived there after years of severe mental illness, escalating instability, and repeated failures by systems that were supposed to intervene when it was clear you were not safe or well. Saying this does not excuse what you did. It tells the truth about what happened. Accountability does not require us to deny your illness, and acknowledging your illness did not diminish the lives that were taken. Both realities exist at the same time. We want you to understand this. The consequences we are asking for are not rooted in hatred or revenge. They are rooted in responsibility, safety, and the reality that you required structure and treatment to survive.
The family's position was clear. They supported consecutive sentences, meaning Mia would serve time for each murder separately rather than concurrently. But they did not want life without the possibility of parole. They wanted accountability, safety, and treatment, but not abandonment.
Your Honor, we support consecutive sentences because 2 lives were taken. Each life deserves to be recognized. That is not negotiable. But we are asking the court to understand that life without the possibility of parole is not justice here. It is abandonment disguised as severity. Consecutive sentences allow for recognition of each loss, long-term incapacitation, mandatory treatment and structure, and future professional review, not automatic release, but accountability over time. That distinction matters.
Dustin also addressed something that had become controversial in the aftermath of the murders: Mia's gender transition and the role of hormone therapy in her mental health crisis. He did not mince words. He spoke about how providing hormone therapy to someone in the midst of a severe psychiatric crisis was reckless and had acted as an accelerant to Mia's instability, endangering the entire family. The brothers also read parts of a statement from their younger brother Tyler, who could not be present in court. The prosecution then presented its case. Prosecutor Jerry Yeager spoke about the severity of the crime, the premeditation, and the need for consecutive sentences. He emphasized that under Washington County policy, consecutive sentences were appropriate in cases involving multiple victims. Each life lost deserved its own recognition, its own sentence. To run the sentences concurrently would be to suggest that one of the victims mattered less, that one life could be folded into the other. That, the prosecution argued, was unacceptable. Yeager described the crime scene, the methodical nature of the killings, the attempt to murder Dustin and his wife. He talked about how Mia had shown no remorse initially, how she had told investigators she would do it again. He acknowledged that she had since expressed remorse, but he argued that the severity of the crime demanded the harshest sentence available under the plea agreement. Then it was the defense's turn. Ryan Stout, Mia's attorney, argued for concurrent sentences, which would give the Board of Pardons and Parole the greatest flexibility in determining if and when Mia could be released in the future.
I need this court to understand something fundamental. Mia is not a neurotypical adult who made calculated evil decisions. Mia has severe autism and schizophrenia, a combination of conditions that left her functioning at the cognitive and emotional level of a young child, particularly during times of stress or psychiatric crisis. And I offer these comments, Your Honor, not as an excuse, but somewhat of an explanation, and just on behalf of Mia, for the court to understand what led up to this horrific events. What this shows, Your Honor, is that Mia's history and character is not that of a calculated, evil, cold-hearted person. Her rehabilitative needs are significant, and very well, she may be rehabilitated, but only time will tell. We can't predict the future on that.
Stout described Mia's mental health history as a perfect storm of autism, schizophrenia, and the hormonal changes from her gender transition. He argued that her rehabilitative needs were significant and that only time would tell if she could ever function safely in society.
By pleading guilty, Your Honor, she accepted responsibility for causing the death of her parents and assaulting her brother. In the pre-sentence interview, as noted in the pre-sentence report, Mia expressed remorse for her actions and regret for what she did. For all of this, she will spend significant time in prison. But as we all know, how much time she spends in prison will be up to the Board of Pardons. Both the options the court has of concurrent or consecutive, both have the life top as an option. So that, simply put, by imposing concurrent sentences, this will give the Board of Pardons and Parole the greatest flexibility to determine if and when appropriate to allow Mia to be released into re-entry society. That's what I'm asking the court to do, is simply give the board the most discretion by allowing concurrent sentences so that they can make that determination, recognizing that under either scenario, they could keep her there for the rest of her life. But concurrent allows them the greatest flexibility to make that decision in the future.
Stout's argument was essentially this: whether the sentences ran concurrently or consecutively, the Board of Pardons and Parole would ultimately decide when, if ever, Mia could be released. Concurrent sentences would give the board more options, more flexibility to respond to Mia's progress in treatment and her level of rehabilitation over the decades to come.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Stout. You may go ahead and read the statement written by your client.
Finally, Stout read a statement that Mia had written in her own hand. She had chosen not to speak in court herself, but she wanted her words to be heard.
And Your Honor, Mia did write the statement. I had talked to her about her option to address the court directly. I also offered the option for her to prepare a statement and have me read it. So I did help her with the very last part of this, but this is her statement, her words. It's fairly short. It brings me great pain and regret of the events that followed. I was not in a stable mindset at the time, and if only I had gotten help, this would have been preventable. It makes me want to die because I can't live with myself. I am sincerely, deeply sorry to my family that I committed this atrocity. I wish I could earn forgiveness in time. Because of my religious beliefs as a Muslim, it would be appropriate to take my life for atonement for what I did.
Mia's conversion to Islam had led her to believe that execution would be appropriate atonement for her crimes. She was asking the court, in effect, to give her the death penalty. But that was not an option on the table. The prosecution had already decided not to seek it as part of the plea agreement. After hearing all the statements, arguments from both sides, and reviewing the pre-sentence report, Judge Keith Barnes prepared to deliver his ruling. He spoke about the gravity of the case, the loss the family had suffered, and the need for both accountability and public safety. Barnes described the crime as very chilling. He acknowledged the premeditation, the break-in, the methodical shootings, the final headshot to ensure Gail's death, the attempt to kill Dustin through the locked door. He spoke about the impact on the family, noting that after hearing their statements, he now feels like he knows the parents. He recognized Joseph as a steady provider who had worked dangerous jobs to support his family. He understood Gail as a tireless advocate who had fought for years to get Mia the help she needed. He understood the irreparable harm that had been done, but Barnes also acknowledged Mia's mental illness. He noted her guilty and mentally ill plea and her documented history of schizophrenia, psychosis, autism, and multiple other psychiatric conditions. He understood that she had been hospitalized just days before the murders, that she had tried to get help. He recognized that her defense attorney had described her as functioning at the cognitive and emotional level of a young child during times of psychiatric crisis. Still, Judge Barnes sided with the prosecution and the family's request for consecutive sentences. He explained that 2 lives had been taken, and each life deserved its own recognition. He could not, in good conscience, impose concurrent sentences that would treat the murders as if they were a single event. Joseph Bailey's life mattered. Gail Bailey's life mattered. They each deserved to be acknowledged separately in the sentencing. He sentenced Mia Bailey to 2 consecutive indeterminate terms of 25 years to life for the murders, as provided under Utah Code Section 763207.7. He added a consecutive term of 0 to 5 years for the aggravated assault on Dustin Bailey. In total, Mia would serve a minimum of 50 years before she would even be eligible for parole. She was given credit for the approximately 18 months she had already served in pretrial detention. Under Utah's indeterminate sentencing system, the Utah Board of Pardons and Parole would ultimately decide when, if ever, Mia could be released. But with a 50-year minimum, she would not be eligible for parole until 2075, when she would be 80 years old. Even then, release would not be automatic. The board would have to determine that she was no longer a danger to society, that she had been successfully treated, and that she had demonstrated genuine rehabilitation. The sentence was severe, but it was not life without parole. It left open the possibility, however remote, that Mia could one day be released if the board determined she was no longer a threat. It acknowledged both the horror of her crimes and the reality of her mental illness. It provided for mandatory mental health treatment while she was incarcerated, ensuring that she would receive the care that had failed her in the community. After the sentencing, Mia Bailey was transferred to Utah State Prison in Draper to begin serving her sentence. As a transgender woman, she was initially housed in a men's unit, pending a review of her status for potential transfer to a women's facility. The Utah Department of Corrections would conduct an evaluation to determine the appropriate placement based on safety considerations and her specific needs. As of late December 2025, no transfer had occurred, and Mia remained in the men's unit while the review process continued. The case drew significant media attention, not just because of the brutal nature of the crime, but because of the complex issues it raised. Mental illness, gender identity, family tragedy, and systemic failures. Social media discussions on platforms like X, formerly Twitter, debated everything from Mia's transgender identity to the role of hormone therapy in her mental health crisis to her conversion to Islam. Some saw her as a cold-blooded killer who deserved no sympathy. Others saw her as a victim of a failed mental health system, someone who had desperately tried to get help and had been released too soon. The truth, as is often the case, was more complicated than either extreme. For the Bailey family, the case has no winners. They lost their parents in the most violent way imaginable. They lost, in many ways, their sister, the person Mia had been before severe mental illness took over her life. They are left with grief, with questions that will never be fully answered, and with a mission to advocate for better mental health resources so that other families might not have to endure what they have endured. In the months following the sentencing, the Bailey brothers have spoken about the need for mental health system reform. They have talked about the 10-day window between Mia's release from the psychiatric facility and the murders. They have asked difficult questions about whether the systems in place are adequate to protect both people in crisis and the families around them. They have called for longer observation periods, better assessment tools, and more robust follow-up care after release.
It is unfair all around that my family has been broken by this in many ways. We've lost our parents, and we've lost a sibling in many ways as well. So either way, no matter what, we are losing as a family on this sentence.
The questions linger. Could this have been prevented? If Mia had received adequate care during her hospitalization, would her parents still be alive? What responsibility do mental health systems have when they release someone who is clearly in crisis? What role, if any, did Mia's gender transition and hormone therapy play in destabilizing her already fragile mental state? These are questions that different people answer in different ways, and there is no consensus. What is clear is that on June 18, 2024, two people who had dedicated their lives to their family were killed by the daughter they had tried so hard to help. A brother hid in a bedroom, fearing for his life, listening to gunshots and knowing his parents were dying. A community was shaken by violence in a place that had seemed safe, and a family was shattered in a way that can never be fully repaired. Mia Bailey is now serving a minimum of 50 years in prison. She has expressed remorse. She has requested atonement through execution, but that request has been denied. Instead, she will spend decades behind bars, receiving mental health treatment and living with the weight of what she has done. Whether she will ever be released, whether she will ever be deemed safe to return to society, is a question that will be answered decades from now by a parole board that will have to weigh the severity of her crimes against the progress of her treatment.